Imagine you're standing in your kitchen, tons of ingredients surrounding you at the ready. You're swiping, tapping furiously, choosing recipes on your phone. Each recipe seems to represent a possible future, waiting to be chosen by you. You, the one to bring it into existence. An order of actions and ingredients that, if undertaken perfectly, yield a dish that looks just like the photo, just like what Julia or Gordon or Kenji made. Is this really accurate, though? It's a wildly important question when it comes to how we experience things, how we choose what is. The idea of the possible, the idea of the real. It gives us a really strange interaction. At first, things that are possible really are defined only by the fact they're not impossible. Julia Childs clearly had the possibility of writing the definitive book on French cooking, at least to me, because clearly she did do it. Sure, why not? It's a bit silly to say, though. It's self-evident and deeply tautological. We also, though, mean it in a different way, one that is far more insidious. Was Gordon Ramsay's beef Wellington possible without Gordon Ramsay? Was that specific recipe from Gordon waiting in the ether of the world, looking for a moment to be introduced and brought out? When I say it like this, it sounds really, really stupid to me. You probably agree it sounds stupid too, but this language is everywhere now. It's used most often by tech bros and Silicon Valley edgelords to talk about the way the latest and greatest thing was just waiting in the wings. Take AI. AI was apparently possible only now because of the speed of computers meeting the massive leaps by NVIDIA in GPU programming. Breakthroughs in understanding of humanity's neural organization contributed. It sounds good, and the things that happen around us always seem to have this narrative. Why did Kamala lose? Why did Trump win? Why did the Rona go so badly, or I guess so well, depending on what you're wanting? These things are made possible by what? For that matter, what the hell does real mean for any of this? Henri Bergson, followed by Gilles Deleuze, they'll be the ones coming to the rescue for us here. It's really not an easy one, though. In order to make sense of all this, we need to do away entirely with this idea of possible or real. That image of thought really comes from this ascetic tradition left to us by religion. This idea of a God who knows all, who sees all, and is selecting possibilities, picking a future thread for us. This is where that good quote from Nietzsche comes into play, the one no one ever finishes. God is dead, but because of how humanity works, his shadow will cast itself on the walls of caves, and we have to vanquish the shadow too. This is part of that shadow, because what is happening in your kitchen when you're setting up to cook is actually way more interesting than possible and real. The recipe book is not a catalog of possibilities. Better to think of it as a field of many tiny elements colliding and interacting with your ingredients, your kitchen, the tools there, your skills, your memories, hunger, creativity, all of this, each element carrying within it not the possible, but tendencies, real forces that haven't come together quite yet. But we've internalized this model of the possible, pretending we too are gods, choosing from pre-existing possibilities, despite our radically limited knowledge. But that's not how creation works. It's not how the creation of the new has ever worked. We do not select from a menu of pre-existing possibilities. We create through two of the hardest concepts in Deleuze and Bergson, the virtual and the actual. One of my favorite foodie channels is Chris Young, one of the amazing chefs behind the Modernist Cuisine book series. His channel is dedicated to weird foodie things, which is basically a bullseye for me. He recently put out a video where he shared a recipe and process for making a cup of coffee that is half cold chilled and half hot and steaming. It features James Hoffman, which means this one video contains almost all the people I use as proof that I might not be the worst companion for a fancy meal out. Now, did you know this recipe existed? A cup of coffee half cold and half hot, that when you drink, you get both at once. They mix in your mouth, passing over your lips as the delta in temperature changes the experience and flavor of the coffees itself? Well, you know now. If I had asked you if it was possible before, you might have said no. But as he outlines, there was this pea soup from El Bulli that landed before the turn of the millennium, where the upper portion is quite hot, the lower portion quite chilled. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if the first of this type of recipe in this thing and form came from El Bulli, given its reputation and history. Now, here is where the Fat Duck, another really kind of extraordinary restaurant, got inspired to try to make this into an after-dinner tea. See, with that success of that tea, he undertakes for the video making a hot and cold cup of coffee. But how did this chain of creations come to be? What is the reality behind the creation of each of these things, so new, so interesting, so odd? Is it that each of these recipes, as they exist, were made possible only through the previous ideal? The possibility of each thing sitting idly in an ephemeral storage space? Is the creation of this like that of God, pulling a thread of things together, making it real? No. We can actually see this in how the tea came into existence, which Chris happily shares with us in excruciatingly wonderful detail.
My job? To figure out how the to make this possible.
Let's talk one part. Gel and gum. Now, gel and gum is one of those things in modernist cuisine packets, white powders for nerds who spend way too much time in the kitchen. It's a thickener. It's akin to gelatin. It tends towards gelling. The name is not a weird accident. Now, I say tends because gel and gum doesn't just do one thing. This isn't Minecraft. This is the real world. A block does one thing in Minecraft where it's placed to do, but in the real world, quite the opposite. Interactions with gel and gum are kind of a fucking nightmare in the kitchen. Do you have the right liquids? Well, maybe, and if you do, it might keep your almond or oat milk from separating. Do you have it at the right temperatures? Well, that would be good. It might even be a way to keep solids more suspended homogeneously in that same liquid. In baked goods, it can kind of mimic gluten. It'll make a more friendly vegan gummy bear. This one ingredient, tendency. Because if you stir it differently, heat it differently, blend it differently, add the wrong thing to it,
Or it wouldn't work. Or it wouldn't work. Or it wouldn't work. Or it wouldn't work.
it doesn't work. It doesn't do the thing. And maybe does a thing you don't expect. There's no ideal way to use gel and gum. It's not how it works. It has a field of potentials. This is the field of the virtual. Think of it as this mixture of chemical, molecular, grain-size viscosity, how it dissolves, etc., etc. And gel and gum, it is a thing, but it exists in the context of gastronomy as a field of forces, waiting for input and output in all of these ways. It isn't enabling the possible. The possible is just that which isn't impossible, which is a really useless designation. The making of any of these recipes, that final moment of creation when the recipe was found, you might be tempted to assume here, this must be the actual. After all, here is where the real recipe is found. But real here is also useless. It's only that because it did come to exist. All the other attempts were just pretenders? No, that's not the actual. Well, not the only actual. You see, as each step becomes realized, when they figured out the temperature to heat water to, when they figured out the ratio of gelatin to calcium, when they decided on the perfect glass for it, so one wouldn't be able to feel the temperature differential through the fingers as they lift the glass, that is also when the virtual became actual. This is another thing we need to do in order to step away from the archaic mentality of the real and the possible. True acts of creation, the actual life as it is lived, all things. It is not ideal. If I were to take you through the real recipe, every step would be clear how it needs to be done. If the recipe doesn't turn out, well, that's your fault. The steps are all there. This also very stupid way to view the world and things in it. About halfway through his video, Hoffman finally gets on camera after getting all the ingredients and instructions.
But yes, I have received the white powders and the instructions therein and have run the experiment.
So tell me what you got. What happened? How'd it work?
The next shot of Chris makes me chuckle, only because having bluntness to tell Chris Young...
The thing didn't set up, didn't gel, and then tasted bad. So not not quite a success.
That his recipe both didn't work and also tasted and smelled terrible is a rather amazing moment to be able to witness. Chris, though, isn't crestfallen, not really. For him, this wasn't the real recipe. It's just another actualization. The actualization is all those things coming together and then being recorded as shit. This recording, though, it doesn't stay here in the present. It moves back into the past as time goes on, as we experience it. That actual becomes virtual. You see, these virtual tendencies, they become actualized through a process of differentiation, not the selection of pre-existing possibles, but the creation of genuine difference. Each actualization changes the field of what can be actualized next, impacts the entire thing. This is why genuine creation is always unpredictable, not because we lack knowledge of all possibilities, but because the virtual field keeps transforming as it actualizes, and the actual becomes part of that virtual field as we take the next step. Chris knows this. So does James. Immediately, they dive into talking about all the things that may have had an impact that just were not accounted for.
Your water's quite hard compared to ours. There's a lot more mineral content. Everybody's coffee is going to be a bit different. How they brew it is going to be a bit different. Its strength, its acidity.
Yeah, but espresso is going to be just violently unpredictable. So I guess a solution would probably be something like a good coffee extract.
The field expands. New things come in, new measurements applied, a new organization of things take place, and something new is created. The new, that's the thing. Creation. This is the thing I would implore you to spend time with as we go through this idea of what possible means and its excessive limitations in the new. In our time, everyone is always worried about what possible futures there are. The pathetic response is always futures already conceived. Yet nobody bats an eye at this silliness. During the Great War, World War I, someone asked Henri Bergson what the future of literature might be once the war ended, given how awful it was. The global impact clearly huge. Bergson told them he had no idea. If I knew what was to be the great dramatic work of the future, I should be writing it. But the work of which you speak is not yet possible. I grant you, at most, that it will have been possible. Let a man of talent or genius come forth. Let him create a work. It will then be real, and by that very fact, it becomes retroactively possible. It would not be possible, it would not have been so, if this man had not come upon the scene. That is why I tell you that it will have been possible today, but that it is not yet so. The possible is the mirage of the present in the past. And as we know, the future will finally constitute a present, and the mirage effect is continually being produced. We are convinced that the image of tomorrow is already contained in our actual present, which will be the past of tomorrow, although we failed to grasp it. That is precisely the illusion. This illusion, I love it. It's a perfect way to put it. This conditioning of the real and the possible is what creates this deeply flawed way of looking at the act of the new, of the creative. It puts within us a consideration, a system whereby a real recipe always existed. It just needed to be found. That the act of creation was nothing more than an existential game of hide and seek. If we go down the road of the possible, we're looking for threads, signs, those special notes in the world that will guide us, a very special person not unlike God, to extract something from that ether. But the thread is not how things work. Things exist in time. Cause and effect are intensely complex, far beyond what we're able to fully grasp. The world isn't about anything that isn't impossible. Instead, it's about realizing the amazing potential that you bear in your own world, the field of the virtual that you inhabit, how it is being actualized all around you, the new, all the time constantly churning forward. I'd like to end with a note from this same essay from earlier from Bergson. Before I do, if you like what I do, please support the QC by heading to patreon.com/DGQC or joining our community at discord.gg/DGQC. Every dollar helps. Every person who joins becomes invaluable. I mean that very seriously. Every day I join that server or I stream and I see you. I know what screen names I'll find, the subjects we will discuss. But let them come, be seated, and chat as I expect. Let them say what I was sure they would say. The whole gives me an impression at once novel and unique, as if it were but now designed at one original stroke by the band of an artist. Gone is the image I had conceived of it, a mere prearrangeable juxtaposition of things already known. I agree that the picture has not the artistic value of a Rembrandt or a Velázquez, yet it is just as unexpected and, in this sense, quite as original. It will be alleged that I did not know the circumstances in detail, that I could not control the persons in question, their gestures, their attitudes, and if the whole thing as a whole provided me with something new, it was because they produced additional factors. But I have the same impression of novelty before the unrolling of my inner life.